Hello and welcome to Everything I Did Wrong as a Church Planter, a million-part series. My name is Logan Wolf, and my wife and I have been in Provo, Utah for nearly 13 years now as church planters. And as I shared in previous episodes, our ministry has taken a number of forms during that time. We started as a mobile church, meeting in the conference center of a hotel. 5 years into that, we navigated a church merger, absorbed another ministry, and became multi-site overnight with buildings and staff in 2 different counties. And after almost 4 years of doing that, we offloaded the entire structure, phased out the staff, and we're now functioning as a network of house churches across the state of Utah. And my hope and purpose in this podcast is to basically just walk back through all that and to kind of break it apart and highlight what I would do differently if I were doing it all over again. If I were pursuing those same courses of action, if I was in the mobile church setup again, or if I was in multi-site again, as well as what I would do differently, and just knowing what I know now. And so there's a lot of things I think I would do just completely different. And my purpose is to save you some of that frustration and heartache and headaches that we went through, as well as just your energy and your time and your money, which I think we go in some of these situations just needlessly wasted a lot of those things. And so I hope it's helpful and encouraging to you. I've been in this season, this is season 2 of the podcast. I've been kind of focusing on that time between our moving to Utah and our grand opening service or our launch service. And in this season, I've actually had a number of guests with me. And in fact, the previous 2 episodes, I had some guys here in Utah. In fact, one even in Provo, where I live. We had Chris Murray and we had Doug Lane. Both of them came as church planters, started something, and for various reasons had shut it down. And then we had, just a couple weeks ago, I recorded an episode. I've not posted it yet, but with a new friend, Matt Manny, on the East Coast. And all 3 of those episodes, Matt's episode's a great conversation, nearly an hour long. We get into there's some practical stuff there, but those 3 as a whole, I feel like there's a lot of mistakes were kind of internal. I think Doug talked about identity and attaching his identity to the work, and Chris talked about being kind of enamored with the end result and not, really focusing on the present and the work that's necessary to get to that end result. And I'm not going to spoil Matt's conversation for you, but so before I post Matt, I just thought, hey, I'm going to break this up a little bit, jump back into kind of our story here in Utah, and bring something that I hope is just very practical to you. Maybe as you are preparing to labor or are laboring in your city right now. So I want to kind of interject between those interviews with those other brothers. So what I want to focus on today is how we use community events to build a mailing list rather than to share the gospel. Instead of sharing the gospel, we used community events to build a mailing list instead of using them to share the gospel. So let me just share the story, and then I'm going to break this apart for you. We came May 2011. I shared in a previous episode, like we had planned to launch September of 2011. Too quick. I want to reiterate what I've already said in a whole nother episode. That was not enough time for our family, my wife and I, to get acclimated to a new city, a new culture, wrap our heads around what God's calling us to do. We moved in May. We jumped right in. So I don't remember reading this in any of those church planning books that I've mentioned before. It may have. I'm not trying to take credit for anything. But I had it in my mind that once we got here, we would just participate in any community event that we could get booth space at. So any public fair, festival, expo, anything like that where we could buy booth space. I was like, we're going to show up and we're gonna promote this grand opening service, and we're gonna solicit contact info. We're gonna keep people updated. We're gonna invite them to this, and we're gonna have this huge grand opening. Like that was this image of grandeur in my mind. Right? We're gonna be everywhere, And that was just one piece of what was a very busy few months leading up to the grand opening service, where we were taking invitations door to door, and we were doing a bunch of advertising and mailers and all this kind of stuff. Community events was just part of it. And so in my mind, I'm thinking the purpose of this is we're gonna garner contact information. So we moved in May. Our very first community event we participated in was in June. Right off the bat, we're hitting it. In fact, we did several community events leading up to the grand opening service. So here's what I mean by community event. Here's the types of things we were participating in. The farmers market. So from late spring through early fall, there's a weekly farmers market, and we were there at least once a month, if not sometimes twice. So the farmers market, the Freedom Festival, which is here in Provo. It's the largest 4th of July festival in Utah. Tens of thousands of people come through it. It's a multi-day event, depending on how the holiday falls. I think it's as much as like 3.5 days, almost 4 days of an event. The Utah Valley Wood Carving Show. We got space at the Utah Valley Wood Carving Show. Man, it was ridiculous. The Chamber of Commerce. We joined the Chamber of Commerce. I don't think that was necessary. I know a lot of church planners jump in and do that, and I almost wonder if they do that because they see other church planners doing that. Someone needs to break the chain. Don't join it. You're not a business. And you're not, I thought it would be a good networking piece, and it really was not. And so, but I would show up at those meetings, and if you sponsored the monthly meeting, you would get booth space at those events. So every month we had a booth at the Chamber of Commerce, and then a couple times a year they would do these business expos, where it was basically I think a full evening of open to the public, where you'd have booth space and people come through, and there's door prizes and all this kind of stuff. Those are fun events. I remember one of them was in an airplane hangar over at the Provo airport. Like it was a cool event. But we were there at those each time they had one of those. The Utah Valley Women's Expo over here at UVU was a multi-day event. You'd have a booth there. Again, tens of thousands of people, tailored specifically for women. And we'd show up there and set up a booth. And then after the merger, when we were in a different county, we were focusing on some stuff in Salt Lake County. So we were at Taylorsville Days up there, which is another multi-day event, kind of like a summer fair. And then I think some stuff with the Chamber of Commerce up that way. So again, and I know I'm missing some, but lots of different events. And so we would just slam our calendar with these things. And like, we're going to show up. We're going to be there. We're going to be present in the public eye. People are going to see us. And we did. And I don't think that necessary desire to be out and in the public was wrong. I think we handled it poorly. Like, I think all that time and energy was wasted. And so here, let me just go through how that would go. So we'd go to these events and we'd have the booth space. Oftentimes it was, you get your 10 by 10 pop-up tent. And so we had a pop-up tent, and we put an 8-foot table in there right up to the edge of the sidewalk. We kind of sit back in it. If it was an evening thing, we'd have lights or a fan or whatever if it's outside. We'd have a banner with our church's name on it. We'd have the table drape over the table, and then like books and Bibles, things we were giving away. And at every single one of those events, we were doing some kind of drawing. That's how we were soliciting contact information, except for the Utah Valley Wood Carving Show. The Utah Valley Wood Carving Show, we actually had wood burning kits, and so kids could come and do wood burning as we would try to invite their parents or whatever to the grand opening service, or to our grand opening service. So we're at these events, books, Bibles, this kind of stuff. The drawings were, I think, typically the same. Most time we were giving away some kind of video game system. I know we gave away Nintendo Wii's a lot of times. Like at the Freedom Festival, we gave away at the Women's Expo, I think it was some kind of big gift basket. We were there a couple times, and it was, candles and books and a leather-bound Bible, and I think some kind of Afghan or something like that. So anyway, there was always some kind of drawing, and we'd have these forms, and they would fill out the form, and the form was too long. Maybe it's another mistake. The form was too long. It was like your name, address, email address, phone number. How can we pray for you? So there's these lines, and there's like some check boxes like, Do you attend a church somewhere? Again, Utah is one of the most church states in America because of the high Mormon population. So everyone's like, yeah. Can we send you information about our church? And it might be one or two. Okay, it's on a essentially it was a 4x6 index card. We'd have those printed. Way too long. And so people would fill those out. We put those in the box, and then we were going to draw the winner. Let me just say this. I've got a list of things I would do differently that I'm going to touch on, but while I did not write this, but I will do this right now. If you're going to do some kind of form you have people fill out for like a drawing or whatever at an event like this, I'd keep it very short. I mean, I would almost like name and email address or however you're going to do your follow up. Like, I don't think we needed to try to solicit all of that info from them. If you reach, you get that second touch, they reach back out, you can get more of that information. But I think sometimes the length of the form discourages people from participating. So anyway, we collect all these forms, sort through them, and we would do a follow up. But because we did collect all this information, we do a couple things. So if they said we could send them more information about the church, we'd add them to one mailing list, right? So we have their mailing address, email address, phone number. If they said no, but they still gave us their contact information, we would at least send something to them, thanking them for stopping by our booth, reminding them about, say, the grand opening service or any other special service, down the road. And then we would kind of toss that information. And so everyone was getting some kind of follow-up. And it was usually the form of just a letter. And then, of course, if they said yes, we put their name in a database where we could do that, like an automated call to them, an email blast to them. Anyway, the follow-up was terrible. The follow-up was awful. So we did all this. What we failed to do in that is we didn't share the gospel there. So we're at all these events, tens of thousands of people passing us over the course of these events. And we're very much focused on, hey, enter to win our drawing. And, because I'll give you some more information about our church later. And then if you show up there, again, 2-3 steps down the road, I'll tell you about Jesus there at that service. And I think part of that was my own lack of competence and confidence when it comes to sharing the gospel. And I talked about that in season 1 of this podcast. Just I didn't know how to make a disciple. And so there was fear in my heart to try to, in those settings, no guardrails, no safety, someone comes up. And we had people, not even like we tried to engage them. Like they approached us hostile. And so I think there was just this fear of, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. And so there was very little gospel sharing going on. There was some, but oftentimes it was fill out this, also here's some free books and Bibles. And we were giving away, just those paperback Bibles. And what else? We gave away, I think Carey Schmidt has a book called Done. We thought that was appropriate for the context. Also, kind of the guy would be, kind of juxtaposed to Carey Schmidt, but what's How Good's Good Enough? Who wrote How Good's Good Enough? Andy Stanley. And then we had another booth because we did some advertising at a local gym, Avasa. They let us have booth space there once, like in the lobby. Like they would let us set up a booth, so we would sit in the lobby of this gym at a booth for like 3 or 4 hours in the evening, and we had a book called it's a Christian book, like First Aid for Mental Health or something like that. I'd have to look it up. If I find it, I'll put it in the show notes. But again, all we were doing there even was soliciting contact information and in various ways. So we didn't share the gospel. I think that is a huge missed opportunity. Like if you come as a church planner, why are you waiting until you're in a quote unquote church service to tell people about Jesus? Like we're called to go and make disciples, and Christ tells us as we do that, he builds the church. And so I think the foremost thing at the front, what should we be giving all of our energy to is I'm going to go share the gospel and try to make disciples. And if I make disciples, I'll pull them together and we'll begin to gather as a body, as a church. But until you have made disciples, like I don't think it makes sense to I've started a church. So anyway, we didn't share the gospel. Huge missed opportunity. I also feel like those booths were unfocused because you're at these events. You've got books and Bibles that we tried to put on theme. They didn't always. Like at the farmer's market, the wood carving show, the books were never on theme. At the business expo, I think we were giving away a book called Business by the Book, and which is a Christian business book. And so we're, again, trying to be on theme as much as possible. But you're there, and then you're doing the drawing, which is usually not related to some of the stuff on the table. And then you're promoting the service, and you're a church, and there's this I don't go to the farmer's market thinking I'm gonna get some tomatoes and hopefully some good gospel today. Like, it's not like maybe like there was this acute awareness that we were putting ourselves in places where people wasn't expecting to see the church, which was part of the reality of it. We wanted to expose ourselves to the people, but then also it's like, are you offering something that makes sense that you're there? Are you trying to have a conversation that makes sense that you're there? And we never were. Like, I felt like those booths were always kind of unfocused and maybe torn in two different places. Again, I think hindsight tightened all that up. I would probably have gotten rid of the drawing. I probably would have narrowed down the content that we had on the table to give away. And my main goal would have been maybe just trying to interact with people and have some conversations, maybe asking some good questions, which I'll get to in a minute because we tried to do this even just recently. The mailing list we assembled out of that. So again, in my mind, this is part of we're going to gather all these names, this contact info, and we're in conjunction with advertising and mailers and all this kind of stuff. We're going to blast the community with these invitations to our grand opening service, and we're going to pack out that conference center, and it's going to be awesome. And that did not happen. The mailing list was awful. It was worthless, and I think partly because they're filling it out for the drawing. Most everybody says, no, I don't want information about your church. Some of them was just, it was their name and their phone number. Some people would just put their name, which I don't even know why they went through the motion of doing that. Because even if they drew it and they won, I have no way to get up with you. So I don't know what they were thinking. And then we send out that email. Everyone gave us an email. We sent out an email after an event. And almost immediately, I think more than 50% of them unsubscribe. And it wasn't what we were trying to, they weren't coming looking for spiritual conversations. And we weren't even at the booth trying to initiate necessarily spiritual conversations. And so it felt, again, it was contrived. It was awful. So the mailing list was junk. So all that effort, all that money, all that time, days at some of those events, junk. And I know this because not just the unsubscribe rate, but 13 years ministry in Utah. We've done tons of these events. There's never been one person to show up in any of our services, when we were mobile, when we were multi-site, even that, no one has ever shown up at a service because of those events. Now, that's not to say they won't. There may be someone who's kept that invitation, that flyer in their, coffee table drawer, and you're going to stumble across it, years later and say, oh yeah. And then they'll look up the name of the church, and it won't be there because we've changed names because of the merger. So even that, this, it's just, it's a wash, man. It's a wash. No one came from it. I think another mistake we made with those events is not just the absence of gospel-centric conversations and the terrible, the follow-up and what came of that. But we persisted in doing those events long after our grand opening service. Now, I was just in Chula Vista, California, talking with our brother out there, Amos. He's a church planter there. And I don't know how we got onto that conversation, but he was telling me how, maybe I was just sharing this frustration with him. Anyway, before their grand opening service, they did some big community events like that where they had a booth and they were inviting people to the grand opening service. And then after the grand opening service, they basically just phased all those out. And I wish we had done that. If the goal was just to get our name out there and maybe try to make some disciples, share the gospel with people ahead of the service. Well, then once the service comes, I think it would have been smart for us to kind of pull back. We kept a ferocious rate of community events. Again, at least 1 or 2 a month all year long. In the summer, there's a lot more going on. So we were pushing some months we were pushing like 3. So every weekend almost is spoken for during those early years. And again, there's that first calendar year after our grand opening service. We launched with, again, I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but we launched with only 14 people. 2 of them, me and Grayson, my wife, some friends from 3, I think were friends from out of town. And I think, so it's single digit locals. So 14 people total. And then the next Sunday and for the next calendar, like the next full year, the next 12 months, no one showed up. Like it was just me and my wife. I would set up and I'd preach to my wife. And even, so it's just me and her. And we were still running all these booths ourselves. Now we had some mission teams and stuff during the summers, and we'll talk about that in a different episode. But we just kept this rate. Like, we're going to show up at all these things. And it was exhausting. And of course we were burning through, like, it's not cheap. You got to, the rental, you know, the booth fee and then the materials you're using and all this kind of stuff. And some of them has more upfront cost than others, but like you're just burning through your energy, your resources, and it was just awful. And so I think it would have been smart for us to do several big events leading up to the grand opening service. And then maybe as we got to, you know, we built the church, as disciples were made and people were coming together, like, hey, we're going to do, you know, 1 or 2 next year, and you guys can help us. And the next year, maybe we'll add 1, and we'll just kind of keep it a little looser and a little more fluid. We just did not have enough help. We did not have enough help to keep doing what we were doing. And it would have been great to have it, because not just to solicit content, but if we were sharing the gospel, it'd have been awesome if we had more than 2 people out there, you know, kind of engaging people. I think another thing, maybe this last thing before I kind of shift to some suggestions, is some of the ways the events were set up is it could appear competitive between us and other churches that may have been there. And I can think of only a couple of events. There wasn't churches at all those events. Like some of those events, we were the only, like we were out of place. You know, like the wood carving show, every booth they're there whittling, showing you what they've made. And then we're all like, kids, come burn this. And I don't know. So, but there's a couple of events, Taylorsville Days one year, and then the Freedom Festival one year, where whoever was in charge of assigning booth spots put all the churches in one space. And it had the sense of like we're in competition with each other. Now, I don't know if any of us would have come out and said that. I mean, in my heart, I know, because that's something I've struggled with. Like I probably felt that, like, this is ridiculous. Like, why would you put us here? Because then people, you know, you're kind of feeding that consumer. They're going to come here, and then they're going to compare us to them, and they're going to compare them to them, and it's just kind of like shopping around. And I wish we had done something a little more collaboratively, you know. And so, in fact, let me make this transition here. I'm not against community events. Like, looking back on it, I don't think, I would never do that again. I actually would. I would just incorporate all the changes that I've already mentioned and some of these I'm about to list out here. In fact, to that point, earlier this summer, so this is 2023, Vineyard Days was taking place, and I thought, I don't live in Vineyard, but I'm close to it, and I knew some brothers that lived over there from a couple different churches, and I thought, okay, I'm going to just ask them if I apply for a booth space, would they come with me? We'll work it in shifts, so no one's going to be there all day long by themselves. We'll work it in shifts, and we're not going to promote any of our churches. We're just going to try to share the gospel. In fact, one of the brothers had the idea. They had some banners they tried to use before, like questions to try to initiate conversations, like what is hope, or what is faith, or I forget the ones. He had like 4 or 5. And so we're just going to use those. We'll prep everybody how to use those as a conversation starter, and we're just going to try to talk to people. And then the goal was going to be, if any conversation turns promising, someone maybe repents and believes, or someone's like, I want to learn more, that'll be your person to follow up with. Like, that's your responsibility. And so that's that collaborative nature that I'm talking about. So I thought, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Now, our booth application was rejected on a ridiculous technicality. And so that didn't happen this summer, and we were all kind of bummed about it. But I think it does highlight the fact that I'm looking back on the years that we've done booths. I've learned some things, and I was willing to go back and try something different. Okay, so let me kind of bring this down to some practical stuff here as we wrap up. I would say one, if you're just looking, like you're in your city, you don't like, where are you learning about these events? I mean, jump on your city's calendar. Like, I would go to Provo City's website, look at their community event calendar. I would go to one of the college's website, look at community event calendar. I'd look at, you could just Google community event calendars, city, state, whatever it is, and just pick things. And, we found so much. In fact, we found a ton of stuff that we flirted with applying for booth space and ended up not because of maybe some cost or some different things, but there's tons of options. And so we just found all that kind of stuff online. So I encourage you to do that. I think a question to ask as you do that is this a good fit for us? Is this a good fit for us? And by that, I think, will it allow for gospel-centric conversations? Now, some of those events we were at, there's other stuff going on. They're loud and people are coming and going. Like there's no one really stopping anywhere. And so other than like handing stuff out, some events, that's all you're going to get. But if the goal is, like I said, I wish we'd done it. If the goal is to actually try to draw people into spiritual conversations, try to share the gospel as clearly and as often as possible, will the event allow that? And so, like, I'd ask questions like, what's the attendance at the event, and what's the venue like, and all this kind of stuff, and how. And I would even kind of, again, in our setting, I wish we'd set up our booth differently to kind of pull people in. We put our booth and the table right up against it, and so there was like, I wish we had created space that people could kind of step in and talk to us a little bit, and make that maybe more conversational. I don't know, some kind of sitting area or something. I don't know. We could have done a bunch of different things there, but I just will this facilitate meaningful conversation. I think another thing to ask when asking is it a good fit is, do you have the resources to do it well? It goes back to that point I said about being unfocused. Like if it's the women's expo, I mean, how are you gonna present your ministry? How even frame the gospel in a way that speaks to that niche, And so I think that's something to consider. Is can we fit in here? Does that make sense to be here? And there's some of community events, like Utah's got a bunch of events that I just wouldn't show up at. Like I don't think this is a place. This is not where we're going to be. But then also, again, back to the resources. Do you have the money or the volunteers? Like, it's okay. Like I was fine. This first few events was just me and Grayson. If we were only doing a couple of events leading up to the grand opening service, and it was just me and her, that would have been fine. But to try to do that for years with just a handful of people was exhausting. And I think also consider the funds. Like the farmers market for a nonprofit, they were letting us in. I mean, it was like less than $10. It might have been $10. I don't know. It was something cheap. But we looked at other events. Like there was a big outdoor expo. Again, probably an event that didn't make sense for us to be there. But a big outdoor expo, we looked at getting a booth at. The booth fee, no break for nonprofits, no breaks for churches. Because why would you be there? But it was $750. So it's like, man, that's a lot of money. So the booth fee, on top of, if you haven't done an event before, I mean, just the initial one-off kind of expense, the pop-up tent, if you're doing a multi-day one, you got to have a tent that you can zip up and close. You've got to have your tables or displays or whatever, any materials you're giving away. And if you, so there's lighting, all that kind of stuff. There's one-time expenses, and then those will obviously, that becomes cheaper the more events that you do. But I think you have the resources to do it and to do it well. I would suggest this, if you're going to do this, is try to collaborate. There's no reason to posture yourself as competition with any other Christian church, ministry, organization in your community, if there are other Christian ministries, churches, and organizations. And so, man, like we didn't try to do here in Vineyard Days, I would reach out to brothers, other laborers in your community that you might know or could get to know, and say, hey, I'm thinking of doing this. Would you want to do it with us? We won't, we're not going to promote any one church above the other, but what if we just got together and offered to pray with people and offered to try to have some spiritual conversations and kind of try to share the gospel and kind of did that together and built out some Christian unity and built out the body that way? I think that is huge. Instead of trying to like, our church is better than those churches and this is the best church in the world, and all, like what if we just were the church in our community and we pressed into that? So I would really encourage you to look for opportunities to collaborate. And then I think this last thing here is know that it's okay to stop. Like just because you start, like we were at the Freedom Festival the first year, 2011. And so when 2012 came around, I thought, like, well, we did it last year. We'll do it this year. And then we'll do it this year. And you just get in these patterns. Well, because we've participated in the past, we've got to show up. The only event that I didn't feel bad about never showing up again was the Utah Valley Wood Carving Show. Like, that was just ridiculous. And I had no qualms about not showing up there again. Anyway, but know that it's okay to stop. And I think go back to our brother Amos's experience and his advice. Like, if you're trying to do this ahead of a launch service, a grand opening service, realize that may be the only time you do it. Like, it's okay to say, this is a season where we're going to be out there engaging people, having conversations, sharing the gospel. We got this big service coming up we want to follow up and let people know about. And then when that happens, like, okay, our focus, Lord willing, especially if we've repented and believed and now they're following Jesus, like, Lord willing, your focus will shift, because now you're going to develop some disciples and help them go out and share. And it's not going to all be on you. So I think just knowing that it's okay to stop, that you don't have to do those types of events indefinitely. But I'm not against it. I think that's probably something I'm going to revisit again and try to do a little better than we just did this summer with it, and just use it as a means of collaboration and building out relationship with the churches here in Utah County. So I hope this is helpful to you. If it has been helpful, would you do me a favor? Would you please subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already? Leave us a rating or review. That is a huge help to us. That helps other people find it. Another way that would help people find it is if you know a church planter, you're part of a church planting team, or something like that. I mean, please pass this along. Just share it either on your social media, or maybe just text it to someone, share it from the podcasting platform, let them know about it. Because we want to help, man. If you're on the field, or you're preparing to go to the field where you feel like, guys, we want to be a help to you. We want to be an encouragement to you. And again, spare you some of the many, many missteps that we have made here in Utah. So again, my name is Logan Wolf. I'm coming to you from my office in Provo, Utah. And this has been Everything I Did Wrong as a Church Planter, a 1,000,000-part series.